So there are lots of major consequences for the 7 Years' War in North America, which I'd like to talk about now for just a few minutes. And of course, everyone is interested about how did this influence the coming of the American Revolution? And it influenced in many ways, and I'm going to name a couple of them. One is that by the end of the 7 Years' War, by the time the battle has settled down everywhere and the treaty is signed in 1763, England is by far the most powerful nation in all of Europe, which in some ways is great. Look at it, it has all these colonies, its army is everywhere, it won this big war, that's wonderful. But that also means, one, that England is greatly in debt. And so it's going to have to start taxing its colonies. And of course, we're all familiar with the terrible Stamp Act and the unhappiness with American colonists being taxed by the British and what all that's going to lead to. So that's one thing that's a consequence of the 7 Years' War, is that England now needs money and it's going to be taxing. Two, it means that if England is the most powerful nation in all of Europe, it has no friends in Europe, because now everyone has a vested interest in bringing England down a notch or two in order to maintain a balance of power in Europe. England is now too powerful. That means France, Spain, anyone is going to be happy to see England get a little weaker. Another important consequence is the Albany Congress in North America. And the Albany Congress met in 1754. Benjamin Franklin, a young Benjamin Franklin, and in fact there's a photograph of Benjamin Franklin that I'd like to show you. Pretend it's here. And you can see that Benjamin Franklin does not look like the typical balded, gray-haired man with spectacles that we usually think of. At one point, Benjamin Franklin was in fact young before he was old. And it's kind of fun to show your students an unexpected picture of him. But in 1754, he's one of the people who arranged the Albany Congress as a way to talk about how to deal better with Amerindian relationships, and also as a way to talk about unity. Because, of course, in the 18th century, each colony was kind of like its own little country, and they had different currencies, and they talked differently, and they were settled differently, and the people there had different customs, and people in Massachusetts did not necessarily understand people in Virginia. And so Benjamin Franklin is saying, well, if we want to be able to resist the French, and if we want to have better relationships with Amerindians, maybe it would be good if we were more united. And to illustrate that, he drew this lovely cartoon, Join or Die, with the broken up snake. Now, this cartoon is shown at the beginning of the HBO special on John Adams as being kind of an American Revolution thing. It's not an American Revolution thing. It's a 1754 7 Years' War thing. Thank you very much. And I've seen people wave this around to argue for states' rights. When as a matter of fact, it does not mean anything about states' rights. It's actually making the point that if each state acts independently, the snake is dead because it's cut up into little pieces. So it's really trying to advertise for unity. And while the Albany Congress is not thinking about unifying and becoming independent from Britain at all at this point, it's an initial effort towards unity that we're going to see again in 1774 with the First Continental Congress. Another effect of the 7 Years' War in North America and how it's going to lead to the Revolution is that, remember, the 7 Years' War is a large world war, and France and England fight each other all the time. It's kind of like a hobby. And so any peace treaty is really considered to be rather temporary. So sure, there's peace for now, but of course the French are looking ahead to the next engagement. So the French, very cleverly, have spies in North America looking around. Spy is kind of has a bit of a tinge to it, but there are Frenchmen in North America looking at the colonies and trying to take the temperature of the colonists and reporting back to Choiseul in France, who is, think of him as the Secretary of State equivalent to just see if there's any possibility at rebellion amongst the colonies. Because the French are already anticipating that if England is going to become weaker, it's going to start with its losing its own colonies in North America. So for the French, the war is not over yet.